This is the Enter Sadmen podcast. Every rock and metal album you should own. Reviewed, rated, and ranked.
Yeah, welcome along, one and all. Welcome along to the Enter Sadmen podcast, episode 73. Good to have your company. My name's Steve. I have the pleasure of the company, as always, of my chums, Mark and Richard. The three of us poised to review, rate, and rank three more albums, which at some point over the next hour or so we will deposit to our hallowed Hall of Fame. The Enter Sadmen Hall of Fame, a league table of rock and metal excellence from yesteryear, which we just keep on adding to. It's what the show's all about. Three more tonight, as I say. And you can see the Hall of Fame in all its denim and leather-clad glory on our website, entersadmen.co.uk. Indeed, there's loads of lists on there. And there are lots of other stuff about us, lots to look about, read about, info about how to find us, because, we're everywhere. Wherever you get your podcast, you'll find us. So this is episode 73. As I say, three more albums to be added over the next hour or so. And what are they, I hear you ask? Well, then, Mark. So the theme this week was death, and you don't get much more metal than that, do you? But that must have given you a few to be tempted by, who you resisted. Talk us through your thought process. What did you settle on?
Well, yeah. Why did I ever put death into the list of themes?
Oh no, you had to. This is metal.
I know. I was thinking I thought we were all going to go in a completely different direction to the direction we went in. I didn't actually go through much of a process at all, because when I put that theme into the list, I already had my choice in mind. Yeah. So I have come up with Witchfinder General's Death Penalty. I'm holding the copy of the album that I bought when it was released in 1982. This is virtually untouched, Richard. You know how I look after my stuff. Right? This is virtually untouched because I didn't much like it.
I presume virtually untouched apart from parts of the cover.
Yes. Well, yes. I should have put a protective sleeve on it, shouldn't I? So this is my copy, and if I take it out and Steve, you will see that I have got it.
You haven't? Not on picture disc?
No, not picture disc.
Oh, right.
Clear vinyl. Clear vinyl.
Wow. Yeah.
Clear vinyl. So, why did I buy this album? Well, there were two good reasons on the front cover. This has got probably the most controversial album cover of heavy metal in the early 80s. Those of us who were avid Sun readers in the UK will know a page 3 girl called Joanne Latham, and she features in all her virtually nude glory on the front cover, while the most unconvincing looking medieval people are poised over her with a knife. And then if you turn it over, it's an even better picture on the back cover, which is Joanne Latham has been ritually sacrificed on a gravestone. Legs akimbo, and possibly the worst fake blood you've ever seen all over her chest. And an ample chest it is too. Yeah. So, yes,
there you go.
Birmingham's finest, Witchfinder General, Death Penalty from 1982 was my pick.
Very good. I tell you what, let's give our listeners a few minutes to go onto Google Images, and then we'll come back and we'll talk through Richard's choice.
They need to wait until the end of the show, because we'll never get them back.
Good stuff. Right, Richard, where do you go with this? Where did death take you?
I had a good look around. I didn't want to go for the obvious. I thought, well, we've got to embrace this, haven't we? We've really got to embrace this. So after a fair bit of research, I settled on a band which I was hoping at some point we'd be able to feature. And that band is Candlemass. And I thought, well, we better start with their debut. So I've chosen their first album, Epicus Doomicus Metallicus. So some doom metal. Doom metal.
Brilliant. We're all doomed. Fantastic. Right. Well, and then to complete the trilogy, I resisted the temptation to go for Megadeth, because I thought you would, Richard, as our resident Megadeth head. But and Killing Is My Business, of course, would have been a bit of a win double, wouldn't it? So I kind of went left field, a little bit down a blind alley. I'm glad I went there, and also went to Sweden for Entombed. and their third album, Wolverine Blues. But we'll look forward to chatting about that later, much later, because it's the third of the three, and we always do these things in chronological order. So, right, let's have a listen to, let's all have a listen to what the three of us have been listening to over the last couple of weeks, and then we shall come back and discuss them all.
Look out for me, come have some mushroom tea. Look out for me, coming to get you, yeah, I'm coming to take you away. You witches are evil, you worship the devil, so listen to what I say.
There you go, then. There you go. Not many tracks, incidentally, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I think there's 23 tracks, am I right, in the show this evening? Which has got to be, it's like 3 EPs, never mind LPs. But that's where we are with these three. Anyway, the first one, as I say, always do these things in chronological order. So, September 1982, and yeah, just an album cover and an album, I'm sure, for Mark to talk about. Death Penalty, Witchfinder General. Go on.
Oh boy. Like I said, I didn't play this very much when I bought it. I only bought it for the cover. I mean, you know, who wouldn't? I like the band title track, Witchfinder General, on it, but the rest of it I didn't really warm to. So it kind of stayed in its sleeve for a long time. And this is a band that I sort of stumbled back across actually over the last 18 months while we've been doing the podcast. So this is an album that I have actually heard quite recently, and I actually really liked it. And I thought, well, that's great. So when it came up again, I thought, okay, we'll do that. This is a band that I think it's fair to say you couldn't get more amateurish in terms of your approach to a career in music than Witchfinder General. From the album cover, which is marvelous. It's fantastic. It's you would never get away with it now, but back in the day, a fantastic cover for the album. But the album cover really kind of sums up the whole band's approach. It's kind of back of a fag packet heavy metal. And I love them for it, actually. I really do. They're a band that started off in the metal heartland of the West Midlands in Stourbridge. Phil Cope, who's the kind of the band leader, very inspired by Black Sabbath and Tony Iommi, contemporary of Brian Tatler. They both learned the guitar from the same person. Witchfinder General began in 1974 as a school band, went through all of the usual school breakups, eventually became Witchfinder General on the suggestion of their vocalist, Z Parks, who Phil Cope, the guitarist in the band, describes as a former kid he knew at school who always used to hang around him and was quite happy to be the roadie for whatever band he was in at the time, and did all of the sound mixing for the school shows they did. But eventually they coalesce into Witchfinder General, and we'll come on to the kind of the litany of disasters that kind of befell the band. They essentially were a recording act for 2 years and 2 years only. The third album they'd written went into the studio and it never got released. And by his own admission, Phil Cope says they never took it seriously. And I think they always probably believed that they weren't very good musicians. And on the surface of it, they're not very good musicians, but that's actually part of the charm of the album.
Opening album sleeve notes.
But yes, so this is Death Penalty. It was released on September the 5th, 1982. Have you two had a look at how long it took them to record it, by the way? Yeah? No?
No.
Okay. It was recorded on April the 11th and April the 12th. And I think that pretty much sums up what this band is all about. So, yeah, sorry, no, April the 10th and 11th, not the 11th and 12th. Not that it matters. Released on Heavy Metal Records, which, this is about an offshoot of the Revolver brand, but they were set up presciently to essentially to sign as much heavy metal talent as they could. And this album is for those who are geeky about such things. This is Heavy Metal release HMR 8. So it's the 8th piece of product that Heavy Metal Records released. It's very nice and compact, 30 minutes, produced by a guy called Peter Hinton, who is also credited by the band as having produced Saxon's debut LP, which I think John Verity might take issue with. I imagine that Peter Hinton was actually a sound engineer or a mixer, did the mixing on that. Phil Cope and Z Parks say that the guy who actually is credited with mixing Death Penalty, Robin George, actually did most of the production work, and that Hinton was more interested in playing pool than he was in getting the tracks down onto tape. It was recorded at Metro Sound Studios in Mansbury, UK. They had already released, and again, in double quick time, I mean hours, we're not talking even days for this, their EP Soviet Invasion, which got them some airplay and some attention in Kerrang, actually. Malcolm Doane wrote a very complimentary piece about them in Kerrang. It was followed in 1983 by Friends of Hell, in which they thought, well, Death Penalty, the cover to Death Penalty was so good, got so much attention, that obviously the approach to take was to put as many tits on the front of that one as they possibly could. And then to mix the sort of the medieval theme with a 20th century police van and police. I have no idea what was going on there. Anyway, the band, Z Parks on vocals, Phil Cope on lead guitar, Graham Ditchfield on drums, and a bloke called Wolfie Trope on bass. Now, the fact was they didn't have a bass player. So Phil Cope, whose alter ego was Wolfie Trope, and who was actually a bass player and was learning to play lead guitar, took on both roles. Now, for some reason, they wanted to be seen as a four-piece. So Wolfie Trope took on the bass. And in order to appear as a four-piece on the cover of the album, they roped in their fixer. And by fixer, I mean not the bloke who got them drugs. He fixed stuff for them, like vans and sound equipment. And his name was Craig Rockersmith, known as Rocky. And he was absolutely delighted to be involved in the photo shoot. And why wouldn't you be? I would have been delighted to have been involved in that as well. It didn't chart anywhere in the world. I don't think it even charted in Birmingham. So its sales, unknown but negligible. It is only 7 tracks, 3 on side 1, 4 on side 2, Invisible Hate, Free Country, Death Penalty, No Stayer, Witchfinder General, Burning a Sinner, also known affectionately as Burning a Singer, and R.I.P. And the one thing, so just to be slightly serious about it, the one thing that I would say about this album, which I have come to realise on listening to it an awful lot over the last week or two, is that this is actually quite proggy, I think. I mean, you two are the prog heads in the podcast, but I felt this was quite proggy. What did you think about it, and had you heard it before?
I didn't know half of that stuff, by the way. There's a film in this band, isn't there? There's an absolute movie here. The proggy bit, all I would say is that good prog bands intend to do what they do. I think they've become proggy, Witchfinder General, almost by accident. You know, they've just got so many ideas hammering around, they've just chucked them all in together as a song, and then thought, you know, rather than actually separate them out and turn them into a longer album. So that's where I am with this. You know, it's just unbelievable. You know, we sit here and pontificate all the time, don't we, about, you know, why bands make it and others don't, trying to figure out those kind of, you know, indefinable qualities that separate success from failure. With Witchfinder General, I am left in absolutely no doubt as to why they sank without trace. But, you know, that's not to say that Death Penalty has not been an absolute treat to listen to, because it just has. You can't get past the album cover. I mean, it's just a marketing masterstroke, isn't it? And you mentioned the sun. I'm guessing, you know, I have done my research into young Joanne Latham purely for professional purposes.
Obviously, yes.
Yeah, actually, nice lady, very nice lady. You're right. You couldn't get away with it today, but it's just a stroke of genius, because you know, hundreds of kids our age would have been, you know, thumbing through the W's down at our price. As it were, and you clock that and you're buying it, and you don't give a shit what the album's like, you're buying it. And I think I'm probably speaking to someone who did just that. So yeah, I get all of that, and therefore, but you know, most people, as you pointed out, are pretty critical of this, aren't they? Almost scathing. Even the band themselves, from what I've read, have got precious little time for it. But it's just so engaging. I mean, it's shite on several levels, but so engaging in terms of customer engagement. It's so infectious in a good way. I've really enjoyed it, and it's actually probably better than many people remember it. I like it. I quite like it.
And I do as well. I absolutely do. There's a little announcement on the Witchfinder General website that says the bands have no immediate plans to reform or tour. So Richard, how did you enjoy it? It's been a treat.
Absolutely.
I'm sure.
With all three of these albums, I had to get into the zone a bit, if you know what I mean. And this took a few listens before it clicked. One addition to the story about the cover was the fact that they shot it in the graveyard of this old English church, but didn't actually ask the permission of the reverend. I suppose if they had asked permission, can we mock execute a topless lady on one of your gravestones, sir?
Well, not only that, but how inspired was their choice of church? They didn't go for St. Martin's or All Saints. No, they went for St. Mary, the Blessed Virgin.
It is a grower. It's certainly grown on me as the more I've listened to it. Even if it was accidental, it certainly is. In terms of the time that it was recorded in the early 80s, it is absolutely Norbum meets Black Sabbath. To your point about proggy, it was a hell of a lot of ideas. There's some of the songs are quite complex in the various parts that they've got. Some work better than others because of that. Some actually do feel they've got a decent structure. Others do just feel like they've thrown everything in a bin, stirred it around a bit. But there's enough there that makes you smile. It's enjoyable. It's been in the end a very enjoyable listen.
Good. Well, look, let's give it a spin. And just, well, I was going to say let's kind of take it to pieces, but I don't really want to do that.
No.
What I want to do is celebrate kind of what it actually is, and what it actually is a band that is deliberately and quite earnestly trying to reinvent doom metal for the early 80s, to take what Black Sabbath had been doing in 1970 and update it and reboot it. And it starts with a song called Invisible Hate. I mean, I think it's probably fair to say that the lyrics, which largely written by Zeed Parks, apparently Phil Cope asked him to start writing lyrics when he was actually the band's roadie, I mean, are incredibly simplistic. And although they purport to deal with a diverse range of issues like politics and sex and drugs and what have you, it's all pretty kind of rudimentary year 5 stuff. But I tell you what, this has got some fantastic riffing in it. In fact, it's some fantastic riffing across the whole album. Richard, I'm sure you'll have something to say about the drums, because they just sound like they're made out of cardboard.
Yeah.
You can hear the bass, you can hear the guitars. Phil Cope says that he hadn't quite learned how to play the guitars properly when they recorded this, which would seem to me to be something of a hindrance if you were looking for a career in music. But, he does a good enough job to make it interesting. And there are all sorts of time changes in this, lots of sound gates, and it's experimental. I said to you, I think both of you, you need to get past the first track to really appreciate in inverted commas, the album. And the only reason I say it is not because this is bad, but because it's such a mind fuck when you first put it on, isn't it? That it's only when you get to tracks 2 onwards that you think, oh, okay, actually, this is what they are. And that may be why I had such a big problem with it when it came out. In terms of not getting into it, other than Witchfinder General. So, yeah, what did you think?
I'm glad you clarified your thought process on Invisible Hate, because I thought from your WhatsApp message that you didn't actually like it, because I did, and I wondered what you'd missed that I hadn't. But I like it because it's completely weird. It's just for the reasons you've mentioned. It starts off, you're thinking you're going to get some sort of southern rock Stourbridge style, don't you, with that guitar opening, and then drops into that nice riff. Some of Zeeb's silly squeals I can do without, but then it just goes a bit here, there, and everywhere, and that's what you're talking about, the sort of progginess, I guess. Very little shape, but does drop back into that riff. I mean, it's not reinventing the rock wheel, this, is it, or doing anything incredible, but it is in its primitive little way. It's very messy, all over the place. And as I said earlier, it's like they've got riffs and ideas rolling around their heads. Rather than separate them into separate tracks, they've just chucked it all into the blender and said, right, that'll do for track 1, 6 minutes 5, Invisible Hate. Yeah, I mean, I've given this a score of 6.5, which I think's, on my scoring scale, that's halfway between 6 above average and 7. So I like it. I
thought you were going to say, for a moment, I thought you were going to say 6.5, which is halfway between 6 and 7.
I like to help.
Oh,
I give the next one, by the way, 7, which is halfway between 6 and 8.
Oh, who said we can't create podcast gold? Richard, Invisible Hate.
I think it's a good start. I mean, it is full of riffs. There's so many, but I like the slow main one. I mean, there's that break in the middle that is so War Pigs. There's no doubt that when it comes to playing slow, Ditchfield can't keep time. But apart from that, I've quite enjoyed it.
See, it's a shame you say that, because Phil Cope refers to Graham Ditchfield as being a seriously good drummer. Even today, he maintains that. So, okay, well, that's good. So that's a good start. The boys have got off to a good start. Invisible Hate then gives way to a track called Free Country, which is just basically a song about drugs. I don't think we need to be any more esoteric or academic about it than that, really.
Well, they weren't, were they?
No, they weren't. In fact, I mean, some of the lyrics are. I mean, it's almost like they've taken every drug they can think of and then tried to find a rhyme for it. So yes, it's got a lovely, I think, hooky chorus.
Yeah.
I really
I love the faster pace. But Aussie-like vocals. I love the fact that they mention all of these drugs, but they draw the line at heroin.
It's a bummer, apparently.
But only because it rhymes with drummer.
But it's got a heavy riff on it behind this sort of very melodic and very catchy chorus. I absolutely love Free Country. I really do. And for me, what I've discovered with this album is I like the charm of it. I like the fact that it is quite amateurish. And I don't, if Phil Cope ever listens to this, he might think that I'm being derogatory. I'm not, actually. I think this is a very young band at a very young point in their career. Well, actually, they were very near the end of their career when they recorded it. But it's a young band with who are just setting out on what they think is going to be a career in heavy metal music, trying to be the next Black Sabbath. And it is charming. It's utterly charming. And this track, I think, is a really good example of that. Yeah.
I don't think, Mark, I don't think Phil Cope would think you were being derogatory. You must have all read the same interview that I did. When he was asked if you could do it all again, what would you do differently? He said, definitely, I'd join another group.
Yes. Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
One more thing I'd say about Free Country is actually the ending. It's got a really nice little solo in that fade out, and it fades out, and it fades out well. It shouldn't finish. Yep. It fades out nicely. So yeah, there's some good bits around.
So we're almost, we're 5.5 minutes away from the end of side 1 already, which comes with the title track, which is death penalty, obviously. I mean, the notable thing about the, I don't know whether you read this as well, the notable thing about this track is that there was a guitar solo at the end of the album that was supposed to stand alone. But Zebe Parks, who was very new to the band when they went to record it, didn't realise that there was a guitar solo that was supposed to just be a lead break. So he sang over it, and they didn't have time to go back and re-record it. So the solo that you hear at the end, which really works, actually, as a kind of a background to his vocal, I think. And, you guys can skip through to the end of it to hear it for yourselves in context. But I think it actually really works. It's quite a nice little solo at the end of it. It's not as catchy as the first two, but it's doomy and it's got loads of character in it. I think side 2 is better than side 1, personally, but you may disagree.
More Sabbath than Sabbath, death penalty, isn't it? It's brilliantly doomy. It's I love it. But you if they remastered this, reproduced it, re-everythinged it, it could, get rid of the cock-ups. It could sound brilliant, couldn't it? It really could.
Yeah.
There's such a template for something really decent here. This is a great track. I really like it. It's a mean track. Phil Cope plays a mean guitar and also a mean bass. I will say that about him.
What do you mean? You mean Wolfie?
Wolfie, yeah. But what I would say is Z Parks cannot sing slowy bits. Shouldn't go near them. I mean, he can't sing full stop, but I'm not holding that against him per se, because a lot of rock singers can't. But he definitely shouldn't be allowed anywhere near slow stuff, because he fucking murders it.
And one of the questions one of the hypothetical questions is, with more time in the studio, I mean, they only had 2 weeks to do Friends of Hell, so it wasn't like this record company was investing lots of money in them. But, with more time, with a decent producer, if you put 21st century production on this, I think you'd have a hell of an album.
It'd be better, yeah.
Yeah.
Let over-egg it.
No, I think the potential, let's assume that they've learned how to play their instruments.
The big first step.
Yeah, and they've got a singer who can hit those notes. I suppose what I'm really saying is they've got some really good songs here. Mm-hmm. But they collectively don't have the ability to deliver and execute them in the way that those songs deserve. I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So we turn it over. And what we come to next, I mean, if you thought the cover was misogynistic, then No Stayer is about as misogynistic as you get. Because this is about shagging a bird and then walking away the next day. When Zebe is asked if he'll be her man, he says, "I'm No Stayer." I quite like No Stayer. It's lyrics aside, I think musically, it's good fun. There's not really a lot that you could. There's no real sort of unpacking of this album musically, is there? Because you're going to end up a bit like we did with Spider, talking about the same stuff for 7 tracks. But there's some some interesting stuff. There's a pretty competent guitar solo that goes on in it, and it takes an age to get going. That's the biggest problem with the song, I think.
It's got a real Lemmy kind of bass riff to it. I quite like the bass riff in this, but this was one for me that was more stuck together than arranged.
Would you agree, Steve?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I don't know. I quite like it. They suddenly turn into Saxon about midway through it. It's a slightly substandard Saxon, admittedly, but it gets into a right proper gallop. Just what was the start all about? Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't know. It just takes forever to get going. I do think that watching this lot down the pub somewhere, if they could have found a bassist to make up the numbers, would have been an absolute blast. I bet it was a great night out at wherever the Red Lion.
Yeah, and they really enjoyed. Yeah, and they really enjoyed. They really enjoyed their nights out. These boys. Yeah, I mean, it's that Saxon moment happens at about 1 minute 40 into the track. Yeah, and that's when the track really starts to come alive.
Yeah,
so
it becomes a classic Wobham riff, and you kind of feel a bit reassured with that, don't you?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Richard. That's exactly why it sounds stuck together, because I think it was. I don't think. I think it was like, well, we've got this piece of music, we've got the studio. Let's put it somewhere.
Yeah, we've only got it for and we've only got it for 48 hours, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. Yeah, the track that I did warm to when I first bought it is track 5, Witchfinder General. Again, another really catchy chorus. And it was the chorus that did it for me. What is it, 40 years ago, isn't it now? But yeah, it's simplistic. Probably doesn't begin to describe the lyrics in this. And this is about the Witchfinder General, who I think we can assume is Matthew Hopkins, the 18th century self-appointed finder of witches for the Cromwellian government. You said that Zebe Parks shouldn't be allowed anywhere hear a slow song. Well, I think we hear all of that on this track. But it doesn't stop me absolutely loving it. I really do really like this track.
It's a track of the album for me. The vocal production reminded me a bit of Angel Witch. Not the vocals, the vocal production. There's sort of a charging Judas Priest type bit that's been thrown in for good measure as well. It's got a good gallop. Changes in tempo and it being back into slow and heavy. I really enjoyed this track.
Yeah, it's a good song. And yeah, Zeeb. Zeeb's okay on this, isn't he? Whatever happened to Zeeb Parks, by the way?
Don't know.
Hasn't even vanished off the face of the earth, I think.
All I do know about Zeeb Parks is he's not imminently intending to reform with Witchfinder General. Which is probably a blessing for all of us. Be interested to see what they sound like now. Anyway, track 6, penultimate track on the album, Burning a Singer or Burning a Sinner, is to give it its proper title. Yeah, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time talking about it. It's 3.5 minutes of pretty much the same sort of stuff that we've had for the previous 5 tracks. I think this is an album that as it goes towards the end, I think it's already given up at this point. It's sort of crawling over the line, isn't it? And out of the door of the studio.
Well, so presumably this was recorded, this had been on knocking around for a while, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it was Parks who called it diabolical. I don't know in what context, but I like it. I really like it. It's the choral harmonies. I wasn't expecting those.
Me neither.
Turned into a pop group. It's brilliant.
That's true, actually. Yeah, that is
it's
true.
Brilliant. It's like something Sabbath did 10 years before. But I tell you what, I think it's a great song.
Yeah, I got a ton of Sabbath coming through on this. I love the riff. The guitar solo's messy, but overall it's all right. Yeah,
good. Well, it's obviously holding up its end more for you than it probably is for me. I think I find Zeeb's vocal slightly irritating. Actually, I think that's probably why I don't like it very much. Anyway, the album signs out with a 4-minute song called R.I.P. I haven't got a lot to add to this that I haven't already said, to be honest. I mean, I'm struggling now to find anything new to say about the album because they're now just recycling the stuff that they've put at the beginning of it. It's charming enough, isn't it? It brings it in at around 30 minutes, which is probably a blessed relief to everyone.
If you're not commenting on R.I.P., then that means you're not commenting on one of the most ham-fisted segues you'll ever hear in music. There's a little middle bit which is just an absolute cut and paste. I mean, it's so funny, and the way they come back out of it is every bit as clunky. It's just priceless. It's a wee bit all over the place, if I'm honest. But then, welcome to the world of Witchfinder General. It's the weak link of the album. They could have ended it as 6 tracks. Can you believe it? But they could have.
Well, I mean, one thing that is worth saying about R.I.P., of course, is it's got a fair, decent amount of cowbell. And, and it does score. It does score fairly highly on ultimatecowbell.com.
Wow.
Would you like to know the score? So R.I.P. gets an Ultimate Cowbell score of 3.81039, which isn't bad.
Wow. No.
Well, where does that put it on the board?
Well, I think Don't Fear the Reapers at sort of 4.2. So but it's been
okay. Yeah,
but it's a higher score than some of the other tracks we've featured in the past, like Uriah Heep and things. So it's not bad. It's not done bad.
3.8, somewhere between 3 and 4, I think.
So there you go. That is Witchfinder General. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. I have to say, I genuinely have. I've genuinely enjoyed all of the albums that we've listened to for this episode, but I particularly enjoyed that one. Let's have some highs and lows. Richard, start with you.
Okay. Yeah. So my high, as I said earlier, is Witchfinder General, and my low. I mean, there are a few that are down there. I'm not that keen on No Stayer, to be honest. So I'll give it to that. But there are a few that are sort of down at that kind of level.
Okay, Steve.
It's the last 2 tracks for me: Burning a Sinner, high, and R.I.P. low.
Well, R.I.P. is my low and Witchfinder General is my high. So there you go. It's not going to trouble the top of the list. I don't think it's going to trouble the top 100 in the list. But it has been bloody good fun. It's given me a smile in a week where I've got COVID. So I'm quite happy with my week of listening to that. Thank you very much, Zeeb, Phil, and Graham, because you've given us all a bloody good laugh in this episode and over the week. And Witchfinder General, they deserve their place on the list, I would say. But it's time to move on. We fast forward by only 4 years, although musically it could be an epoch, and we get to 1986 and Candlemass, Epicus Dumicus Metallicus. Richard.
Yes, Candlemass. So formed by bassist Leif Edling in around 1984, who appeared to have a sort of a real single-minded mission to write their heaviest and most epic songs that he could possibly think about, and I guess go a bit against the grain. I mean, this was mid 1980s, so we had the sleaze and thrash and sex and partying and excess and everything else, and the idea of a band playing ridiculously slow and ridiculously heavy really did go against all that. But this is what he wanted to do. They released a number of demos early on, trying to get a record deal, and their third demo in the end led to a deal with a small French label called Black Dragon, and they gave Candlemass a 1 record deal and a budget of $1,800. So nevertheless, they entered the studio and entered it on in February 1986. And to record this album. We'll come back to it, some of the stories, but the studio had no heating, was in the bowels of some old building, and so they froze to death, which I think probably added to the mood of the album.
Opening album sleeve notes.
It was recorded February, released in June 1986. And have I said the title yet? I said it earlier. So the title of their debut album, Epicus Dumicus Metallicus. Sort of a faux Latin play for epic doom metal. And they appear to be, would be interested in anyone else's views, but they are credited with being the inventors of this real heavy doom genre. So it was released on Black Dragon, produced by Candlemass and a guy called Ranja Wahlqvist. It was recorded in Thunderlode Studios in Stockholm in Sweden. It was succeeded by their second album, Nightfall, which I'm sure will feature at some point on the pod in future. And in terms of personnel, well, as I said, it was the band was formed and led by the bass player Leif Edling. He brought in Mats Björkman on guitar and Mats Ekström on drums, and they had a few guest musicians. I mean, so Candlemass at the time were just a trio, but rather than play other instruments and sing and make up names, they actually got some other musicians in to produce to create this album, and they got in a guy called Johan Langqvist on vocals. He did just last the one album. Eventually, I can't remember how long it was, 30 odd years later, then he did become once again the lead singer. They also brought in a guy called Klas Bergvall on lead guitar to do a number of the solos, and another guy called Christian Weberid to do a few bits and pieces on guitar, and the services of a lady called Silla Svensson, who sang backing vocals on the final track. As with Witchfinder General, no evidence whatsoever of this selling that much in the UK, US, or around the world, but it has become somewhat of a lost classic, I suppose, looking back, whatever it is now, 30 plus years. Track wise, only six tracks, 3 on each side, but some of them they're longer, some considerably longer than Death Penalty. So the album runs to around 43 or so minutes in length. Well, this again has really, really grown on me, and I'm so glad I chose it. It does require a certain state of mind and being ready for this kind of very, very slow, very heavy, very operatic kind of metal. But I think it's genius. I think it's brilliant. So how did you guys get on with it?
I'm afraid I didn't find it genius at all. I'm not fussed about it in the slightest. I'm really sorry. It's like Sabbath on beta blockers. I remember the first. I'll tell you what, because it has got cult status. You're absolutely right. And as soon as I got Spotify many years ago, I didn't buy it, but I knew the sort of fanfare that had gone with Candlemass, and in particular this album. And it was pretty much as soon as I got Spotify, I sought it out, and boy, Yeah, no, I like I mean, you two know me. I like my metal generally done at pace. I mean, that's the bottom line. Or when bands do slow it down, just slow it down occasionally as a counterpoint to the rest of it. But a whole album at this pace, yeah, no, it's just too much for me. I mean, they do show a bit more imagination pace-wise on side 2, perhaps, than side 1. But side 1, I just find it's depressing. You know, it's depressing. It genuinely is. There's lots of fair musicality on here, and there's interesting things going on. But so what? The overall sonic landscape for me is just a bit too ponderous. And the issue is these songs are long, so you get some ideas, some good ideas, and there's some great riffs, some good riffs, but they just can't sustain it over the course of 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes or whatever it is, and they vanish up, several hundred fucking cul-de-sacs. It's a heavier yes in that regard, which is about the kindest thing I can say. That was cheeky. That was a cheap shot. It is, as I say, it is held up as a major piece of work in the field in which they operate. And you're right; they are seen as a kind of pioneer of the movement. This is a must-have for any self-respecting doom, black, goth, metalhead, whatever you want to call them. But after half an hour of this, Rich, I'm crying out for some awesome.
I mean, it is, yeah,
just an injection of. Just some pace. Just put some pace in. There's enough beef about this to enjoy. So, not enough speed for me.
I guess that's fair enough for you. You spend so much of your enjoyable life at the other end of this spectrum, don't you?
It is true.
I've realised through listening to this, I prefer it slower, and I'm happy to have it slow. And I much prefer a vocalist who can actually sing, which is the other reason I like it.
Well, we'll come to that as well, because he's an interesting singer as well, isn't he? Loaf and meat, rearrange these two words, and it is quite theatrical, isn't it? But yeah, it's just not for me. It's not, and I've not scored it badly because it's heavy, and I love my music heavy. But it's just not fast enough for me.
Mark, I'm not sure what Steve was expecting. Apparently it's depressing, but it's got track titles like Solitude, Demon's Gate, Black Stone Wielder, Under the Oak, and A Sorcerer's Pledge. Yeah. I mean, this is not One Direction. I think we can pretty much. I think we pretty knew what was coming. I've really enjoyed this. Actually, I have to say, it's not a band that I had listened to. It's really interesting, isn't it, that it didn't chart, it didn't sell particularly well, and yet it is one of those albums whose name you just know. It doesn't matter whether you've heard Candlemass before, it doesn't matter whether you like them or not. Epicus Doomicus Metallicus is synonymous with heavy metal. Forget the subgenres, it is just synonymous with this music. So I think I probably dallied a little with Candlemass just on the basis of ought I to like it, and I kind of, on first listen years ago, took the view that no, I didn't much like that, thank you very much, so I didn't really need to go and discover any more of it. So when you kind of rocked up with it a couple of weeks back, I was slightly nervous because, in my head I'm going, it's Candlemass, I don't like them. But then the whole process over the last nearly 2 years of doing this has been to just put aside your prejudices and just go into this stuff with an open mind. So that's what I did. And I've really enjoyed most of it. There's some tracks that I find myself drifting, in terms of my concentration. I think it's almost like a contradiction. You have to give your full attention to it, but that's quite wearying. That is quite wearying. And that's where, Steve, I get what you're saying about it's relentlessly doomy and heavy and tiring, but the lighter stuff in it, because it's shades of black, isn't it? So the stuff nearer the grey,
the fucking lighter stuff. What's that? The bit where you turn it over?
The ballad, the lighter stuff. I really enjoyed it. I think there is that marrying of a vocal performance that is delivered by somebody who can actually sing, which I don't think is the same for Entombed, much as I've enjoyed that in a different way. So I had a good time with it, actually. And there are a couple of tracks on there, Under the Oak particularly, that I would definitely put on. In fact, I have put on playlists. So I think that was a good pick.
All right, great. Okay, well let's give it a listen.
On the dark gates, the passage fades.
tracks altogether, 3 on each side: Side 1, Solitude, Demon's Gate, and Crystal Ball. So opens with Solitude, and Johan Langqvist's mournful vocals open the track. I mean, he performed these vocals despite not hearing any of the music the band had performed beforehand. He was persuaded by the drummer, and basically arrived at the studio, did 2 or 3 days, and then buggered off back to his family. So actually, I think it's quite a big vocal performance. A minute or so in, we get to then the first of these deep guitar riffs, big toms, and an earthquake-ever bass riff. And I think, this is one of the heaviest songs I've ever heard. But then you got these operatic vocals sort of soaring over the top. I've decided we're going to call this track Osmium, because apparently it's the heaviest metal that there is. So Solitude, very dark, very heavy. Good production. I love Solitude. I think it's such a different and such a timeless song, actually.
I'd agree with that. The opening lyric is, I'm sitting here alone in darkness, waiting to be free. Lonely and forlorn, I am crying. I long for my time to come. Death means just life. Please let me die in solitude. I don't know what you mean, depressing.
Yes, yeah. What was I thinking?
I'm with you, Richard. I love this. I think this. In fact, I think it's the best. Well, I think Under the Oak is probably the highlight, but we'll get to that. But this pushes it a close second. I can do without the sort of the slightly higher pitched stuff in it vocally. That seems to be uncomfortably beyond his vocal register. But I think there's loads of interesting stuff going on here. It's sort of the sort of almost orchestral, almost acoustic kind of moments in it where the track just sits down and then it comes back in with that sort of very heavy riff. And it is a really, really heavy riff, and not a riff in the conventional Tony Iommi Neon Nights riff either. This is a plodding, doomy riff, and exactly what you would expect from them, I guess. Yep, like this.
Yeah, me too. It's kind of paying homage, isn't it, to the origins of sort of Black Sabbath, some of that really doomy Sabbath, just making it more heavy, more theatrical. And as soon as you hear Langqvist sing, you know that this is going to be quite a journey with him. It's very Phantom of the Opera, not Iron Maiden, as in proper Phantom of the Opera, that kind of dark, foreboding story feel to it. Definition of heavy metal, isn't it? It's just heavy, and it's metal, and it thumps, and it's proper, and I love this as a starter, and now I just cannot wait for the step up in pace.
So you're saying, Steve, that this is kind of like musical theatre?
Yeah, well, that's what I said earlier. Loaf and meat. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I much prefer this, don't get me wrong, but clearly.
Well, just clarifying. But
there is that about it, isn't there? It is very dramatic.
Yes, it is dramatic. Yeah, it's a performance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Steve is expecting the step up in tempo, and of course he doesn't get it because Demon's Gate follows Solitude, more slow, heavy. I mean, we've got quite a groovy drum beat at times, some atmospheric synths, but some big ringing power chords, double bass drum. Guitar-wise, they had real difficulty because while Stockholm was full of fantastic guitarists at the time, they were into AC/DC and UFO and Nwabum, and they just didn't want to be associated with the band that played ridiculously slow, ridiculously heavy metal. They managed to find at least someone in Klaas Bergwall to do the lead guitar, but again, after they'd finished the recording, he decided that was enough, thank you very much. Maybe it weighed them all down. I find Demon's Gate pretty scary, actually. Perhaps another reason I love this album is that I think the production on the drums, particularly on this track, is epic. Well, you talked about a bit proggy. I mean, in its own way, it's quite varied, it's quite layered, it's I think quite well arranged, Demon's Gate. What about you two?
Yeah, it's not the step up in pace I wanted, as you know. This is anti-thrash, isn't it? It's so mournful. There's a great guitar solo in it. Edling wanted this to open the album, didn't he? Can you imagine? Fuck's sake, bloody hell! Solitude was wearing, but this just bores me a bit, if I'm honest. It's 9 minutes long. There's not enough on it to energise me. You're right. You do have to. I've had a long time to work on this, and I keep going back to it. Crumbs. I'm just looking for nice things to say about it. It's a struggle. I mean, it's a struggle. It really is. It's just this sea of
and you
doom.
have to be in the mood. You have to be in the mood.
You do. Yeah. Oh, you have to. You have to be. Yeah. And that's what I find so fascinating about this whole story. When was this? 86? Did you say 87? just think where rock's going in 86. Even Anthrax are getting in the charts. Everyone wants to be commercial. And somewhere in fucking Scandinavia, there's a band retreating under a stone on a dark winter's night and just think, no, fuck that. We just want to get really miserable.
Inspired.
I think it's on a cold winter's night. It is, yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, listen, I don't mind the idea at all. Anyway, Demon's Gate, just cut it off at 4 minutes 12.
Well, that's pretty much kind of in keeping, really, isn't it? Because anyone who's listened to episodes 47 and 48, or 48 and 49, Steve, knows that you don't do stories. You know?
That's true.
So you were never going to like this.
Oh, God, was that the Crimson Idol?
Yeah, Crimson Idol, followed by Meatloaf. I mean, I like this, completely get what Steve is talking about, because musically it wears me down, but I love the story, and I, like you, Rich, I find it really quite disturbing because the imagery that they create is pretty dark, pretty unpleasant, and they're dealing with much the same subject matter as Witchfinder General, but their lyrics are slightly more sophisticated, aren't they? You know, we're talking about witchcraft and sinners and all of the stuff that you know Phil and Zeeb and Graham were on about, you know, back in '82, but it's slightly different kind of, you know, ambience to it than that. No, I do like. I like the story. I like the lyricism of it. Like Steve, I think 9 minutes is probably too much.
Okay, and the side finishes with Crystal Ball, which I mean carries on in the same vein. Steve will be pleased to hear. I mean, for me, this is the weakest of the tracks on side one. I feel it carries on too much in the same vein as Demon's Gate, actually. So, Steve, I'm kind of with you that I'm quite happy with Demon's Gate at the length that it is. I think it's a as Mark says, tells a great story. Crystal Ball, it is a bit more of the same. It's not as good. I quite like the widdly guitar solo in it. There's a nice chugging riff after about 2.5 minutes. There is a fast bit. There is a faster bit in Crystal Ball, but then the main riff comes back. And even I, by the end of Crystal Ball, I'm feeling quite weighed down, I must say.
There is a fast bit, Richard. You're right. And it's 17 minutes into the album. I've clocked it. And it's that's where we are with that bit you're referring to in Crystal Ball, which, you know, redeems the track as far as I'm concerned. It's, you know, that little guitar break into a bass line, into a different pace riff, thank the Lord, powers along, bass drums, presume there's more than one, kick in at speed. And there's the kind of pace I'm craving, you know. Doesn't last, of course. They drift back out of it, but it's better than Demon's Gate.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. I prefer this, probably because it's got that change of pace. The rest of it around it is a bit more of the same, and yeah, it is quite relentless. And so far, so good. I'm interested still at this point.
Okay, well, let's turn the record over and we'll start side two. As I said earlier, I've been recording. They recorded it in these studios in Stockholm. In the building, the studio was 3 floors beneath the ground. In the middle of this subway at the University of Stockholm. They decided they wanted to work there because they'd heard a demo that Yngwie Malmsteen had done that was recorded there. They said, you know, you have no idea how cold it was, totally freezing. The radiators didn't work, which made it even worse. You had to see what it looked like. We're all dressed in fur coats, woolen gloves, long johns. Trying to play the guitar with cold hands is almost impossible. I know that we're a doom band, but this was suffering way beyond the call of duty.
Brilliant.
So Blackstone Wielder then. So double bass drum, a bit of a chug at the start. I mean, a bit of a groove to the riff, I think. Bit of a groovy, heavy riff, this one. I like the beat. Again, you've got Langvis soaring vocals. I feel it loses it a little bit in the middle, but I do like the back end. It's a really good solo. And again, back into that groovy, heavy riff. Quite happy with the start to side two.
Yep, me too. Like this. I like Blackstone Wielder, and I like it at about the 4.5 minute mark, particularly for all the reasons you just said. It's got a lovely wailing guitar solo, and you boys know how much I like a wailing guitar solo.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really like that. Looking at the lyrics of it, is this some sort of dark take on the birth of Christ story?
Don't know.
It's about the Blackstone Wielders travelling to Bethlehem to light the way for the one who is born, and that the stone is then used for evil. I have no idea what the references are, but it sounds like it could have been retitled Black Christmas.
I like Blackstone Wielder. I think it's this is how all tracks on this album should be. You know, great riff, stonking riff, and then that you said that change of pace, Richard. What a euphemism for descending into a pit of misery. I mean, it's like they all said to themselves, "Right, we've got to put the brakes on." But as you say, they do re-emerge from it back into that main riff, and which in many ways saves this track. That middle bit, fuck me, it almost stops.
It does. Yes, you're right. All right, track 5 then is Under the Oak. Well, surprise, surprise, it's
what a riff!
I know it's
what a riff.
I mean, it's like with a squealy guitar over the top. It's a bit like a slowed down, heavier Scorpions. Didn't you get that?
Yes.
I can't speak, so you carry on.
And almost, Mark, Dave, maybe I'm reading too much into this. Almost the vocals had almost like some Pink Floyd-y phrasing. So you've got Pink Floyd phrasing vocals, killer Scorpions, and it's super heavy. And another fantastic solo. I like this.
Yeah, there is. It does get very messy, I think, towards the end. But that solo, that riff, they are redeeming features, given that they're a heavy metal band. You know, I'm a sucker for a riff and a solo, and they tick both those boxes. I still think it's a messy track, which is a shame, because that start is, it's 9 out of 10 potential, isn't it? But so he doesn't get it.
That riff. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Favourite track on the album, definitely. The more this album goes on, the more he starts to sound like Michael Paulson to me.
Okay.
Lots of beats.
All right, we'll come on to the last track in a minute. But as we said earlier, I mean, this didn't sell well at the time, and in fact, it sold so poorly in its initial stages that they were dropped from Black Dragon, and they were hammered everywhere in terms of the various press and the bigger magazines. No one really got it. But then people did start to get it, and by the end of the year, it had begun to sell in some pretty impressive quantities. Black Dragon were forced into a second pressing, then a third, then a fourth. Tried to get the band back, but by then they'd moved on, and they went with another label for their second release. But yeah, I think it's steadily grown in popularity. Now has this cult status. And the last track then is A Sorcerer's Pledge. Quite an epic to finish. A nice short song, the kind of short song that Steve likes. 3 main parts: sort of acoustic guitar, sort of vocal operatic to start with, build slowly for the first couple of minutes, then some real power in the second movement, and then this really slow bass drum driven chug in the third, and then some haunting angelic vocals from Silla Svensson as the whole song fades out. Not as strong for me as others on the album, but still a very interesting finish. And yeah, beginning to end, I've really enjoyed this album. I've ordered it on vinyl. I'm gonna use it to test the bass of any future speakers I plan to buy.
I think this is a great out, actually. I really do. I really like this as an out song. Steve's sitting there shaking his head. No, I really do. I love the kind of the 3 acts that it goes through. I think it's interesting, and it's got all of that, those keyboards rising and falling through it. No, I'm well on board with this.
It's interesting, yeah. No, there's nothing. Hats off to Leif Edling for his vision. I'll say that. I mean, there's a real sense of sort of artistry and theatre and imagination. He's the chief songwriter, I'm guessing, Rich, isn't it? But the boys are talent. No two ways about it. And there's loads of interesting ideas in A Sorcerer's Pledge. But then, inevitably there are going to be loads of interesting ideas in a song that lasts 8 minutes 20 and should have been cut short at about 3 minutes 50. Lots of it just doesn't work, and I just find myself shouting into my headphones, just fucking get on with it. And that's where I've been with this album.
I mean, the fact is, it's got the same number of notes as the songs that you like, because
yes. Yeah, we could have ripped through this in 10 minutes. Exodus, Jesus. Yeah.
Okay, all right, very good. Well, Steve, then give us your high and your low.
Yeah, okay. So I've got a couple. So I've got Blackstone Wielder and Solitude at the same. So it'd be one of those. Let's say Solitude. And yeah, Demon's Gate is the low by some distance.
Yeah, Demon's Gate is probably my low as well. But it's Under the Oak. Under the Oak. Every day of the week. Okay,
and I mean, I've not scored any of these low at all. But Crystal Ball got my lowest score, and I don't think I can beat Solitude. An amazing song. I mean, I think one of those game-changing tracks, frankly. Right, so, and we better move on to the third, which is Steve's choice, and Entombed and Wolverine Blues from 1993. Steve?
Yes, and finally, to a band to appreciate on this night, on this episode of episodes, the importance of track length. 10 tracks, nothing longer than 4:30, 7 of the 10 at under 3.5. Crack on, head down, rock like fuck, get out of here, job done. I almost want to award them an extra point for thinking of their customer base.
Opening album sleeve notes.
This is Entombed and Wolverine Blues, Entombed's third album, a Swedish band and the second Swedish band, formed from the ashes of Nihilist in, they were formed as Nihilist in 87. I think they kind of, by about 1990, the release of their first album, they were Entombed. And this came out on October the 4th, 1993 on the Earache label, British indie, part of the Columbia Empire, Nottingham-based company that was championing thrash and extreme metal, and they found their way onto that. 35 minutes, 10 seconds long. You do the maths. Bear in mind when this is the early 90s, when everyone's fucking doing CDs with endless remixes galore at the back end of these things, and these boys are saying, no, we can do 10 tracks in 35 minutes. I commend them for it. The producer was a guy called Thomas Skogsberg, and they used his studios, Sunlight Studios, in Stockholm, in Sweden. Previous album, it was very different, called Clandestine in 1991. It was the only album that didn't feature the lead singer on this, Lars Goran Petrov, and it is a very different album, and it kind of split opinions between the fans. And the next album after it, it's a crazy fucking name, but it's the Roman numerals for 666, kind of, I think, which came out in 1997. The band, Lars Goran Petrov, as I say, on vocals, Uffe Sederlund and Alex Hellid were the guitarists, Lars Rosenberg on bass, and Nicky Anderson, the drummer. I think he was the vocalist on the previous album. Chart position, I doubt it anywhere, if I'm honest. 10 tracks on each, 5 on each side. I Mastered, Rotten Soil, Wolverine Blues, Demon and Contempt, and then on side 2, Full of Hell, Blood Song, Hollow Man, Heavens Die, and Out of Hand. Opening thoughts, what a treat. Just what a treat. You know, you can overcomplicate this shit, and we often do. And I've seen Entombed as a band, and this album specifically dubbed as any number of things. We'll all have seen this death and roll sobriquet that's been added to it, death groove, industrial thrash, any number of different things. And you see all these things written, you know, production-wise, about sort of the guitar buzzsaw sounds and techniques and this, that, and the other. And we'll have a look at all that in a bit. But if you tear away all the overthinking and all the production stuff, that most of which leaves me cold, just stick the fucking thing on. And I've just sat back and thought, yeah, you know what, that is a really classy piece of heavy metal. Nothing more, nothing less. Not too fast, not too slow. There are some serious riffs on this thing. Some clever segues, some bridges, some layers. You know, a singer who won't be everyone's cup of tea, in our friend Lars Goran. But I've got no problem with him. His growling style for me is spot on for what Entombed is trying to do in the sort of, you know, this world of death metal. So yeah, you know, I've really, really enjoyed listening to just some no-nonsense, meaty, heavy metal done well. You know, people can call it what they want. I call it classy. Yeah, what say you two?
Certainly heavy, certainly some fantastic riffery. It is I think, very much in the Pantera kind of mould, so I like it. And I'm really glad that you chose their third album and not their first or their second. Because, you talk about growling on this. Well, that's nothing compared to the vomiting, I think, that's on the first couple of albums. Again, listen to this for the first time, then giving those two a listen, realising, oh, thank God he picked this one. Yeah. And I kind of got in the zone. Again, some parallels with Witchfinder General. Some of the arrangements work better than others. But I think as a band, that they work incredibly well. The two guitarists work very, very well together. And I've loved the riffs and I've loved the power.
Yeah. And this was a risk because Left Hand Path and Clandestine were both, you know, Entombed were held in really seriously high esteem on the backs of those two pieces of work. You know, they were on top of the death metal world and could have just repeated it, but I think they took a real risk with this sort of change in sound. Clandestine was quite evocative in a different way, but less groovy, and I like the grooviness of this. You're getting that Pantera buzz. I'm getting a lot of Anthrax in here as well. There's a kind of grooviness about it that they were keen to explore, and I'm really glad they did. I like them both. I like Clandestine, but I love this one.
I love the fact that a load of their fans disowned them because they'd sort of sold out and gone all light on them.
I know. Isn't that priceless? Yeah, it's just too weedy. Mark, do you like it?
Do I like it? That's an interesting word, isn't it? Do I like it? I'm not sure like is the right word. I admire it. I think it's very clever. I like Richard. I struggle with the emetic vocal kind of performance, really.
But you like Five Finger Death Punch, don't you? Which it's not.
Yeah, but he's a bit like Corey Taylor, isn't he? Ivan. He's got that sort of that very melodic kind of in his locker. He's got that, so he can sing. He can sing. And we don't get any of that on this, really.
No.
Not in the same way. So, but having said that, this is an album of 10 tracks that come in collectively at 35 minutes. So it's not like you have to sit and listen to 9 minutes and 10 seconds. Like, can you imagine if he was singing for Candlemass? I mean, fucking dreadful. I found it interesting and enjoyable. Would I put it on a playlist? No.
Well, none of it.
Couple in the middle, maybe.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I love it. I do think it's really good. I think it's a really good piece of work. I think it's an improvement on what they did before, and I'm glad they gave it to the world. They were an important band in the Swedish death metal story. Can you believe there's a Swedish death metal story?
Yeah, but I was going to say, what is it about the Scandos and their death metal?
Yeah,
I don't know why. Why does it start there anyway? It's a rhetorical question. I don't expect you to know the answer.
No, I don't. But they should be rightly proud. I mean, they've
cold and dark for a bit of the year, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
yes,
yeah. And if it's not cold enough and dark enough, Richard, they move 3 floors down to get even colder, right? Brilliant. Right. So side one, as I say, 5 tracks, and it starts. It's kind of messy start actually into iMaster. It's into a blinding riff, and it's only 3 minutes 20 long, but it seems to adopt to quite a few different styles within it. Some hardcore speed, Metallica, Pantera, chugging. First kind of sign of that. There's a blinding solo, and then it kind of follows up with Rotten Soil, which goes again. I'm lumping the two together because of track 3, which is an absolute counterpoint to tracks 1 and 2, and I think the boys will agree. So iMaster and Rotten Soil, really rock solid, both great starts. A lot of Pantera charging, and a heavier Pantera.
Track 1, some really good interplay. I mean, there's a fantastic heavy riff at the start that I wish had carried on. But I like the change for the chorus. Would you call it a chorus, I guess? And there's a slowdown I quite like. Yeah, Rotten Soil, didn't like it so much. I like the break in the middle. Okay. The rest is a bit forgettable. Not a bad pair to open with. I
like that chug on Rotten Soil from the off, I must admit. I think it's quite a change. I actually think it's an improvement on iMaster, but Mark?
I do actually quite like Rotten Soil. I think I almost prefer that actually to iMaster. To be honest, the first time you listen to this, I'm just trying to get my head around the vocals. That's where I was at. I actually prefer Rotten Soil because it's a little bit slower.
You've heard worse growlers, haven't you?
Oh,
surely,
God, yes.
Burton Bell.
Remember
Fear Factory?
Yeah, he is on the more melodic end of that spectrum, isn't he? I don't have a massive problem with his vocals. Yeah, I like the fact that it is really varied and interesting, though.
It is.
There's stuff that stops and it goes and it rises, it falls. There's lots and lots going on. Certainly, it keeps you interested. But yeah, Rotten Soil for me of the two.
But then you get the title track almost out of the blue. You get this absolute gem. It's only 2 minutes, 16 seconds long. And what a dirty, earthy chugger it is. One of those great absolute bounce-alongs, which someone like Pantera did so well. And the comparison is obvious in this. But I think this is genius. I think it's a brilliant track.
But Steve, it's slower.
It is.
Yeah, I think this is great. It's really, really heavy, It's got a great groove to it. It's not only the vocals, but they're really reminiscent of a Dimebag Darrell type riff. Yeah,
Yes.
track of the album for me.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like this. I like the riffs more than I like the vocals. If I could strip his voice out, I'd be having a whale of a time with this.
What we get then is the final two tracks of the album, of side one, which is Demon, which is fine, which is okay. It's just anger and it's gritty and it's great fun, and it's some proper no-nonsense beef. I have no problem with it at all. But to me, it's just a prelude to one of my tracks of the album, which is Contempt, which is a step up in class from Demon. Just atmosphere, menace, the first half of the song, great bouncy riff again, several layers, never messy. But it's the second half of the track, which you didn't see coming. Little melodic, almost melodic segue into a really wonderful guitar chorus, made all the more wonderful by the rhythm section underpinning. It's a brilliant out on Contempt. I think it's a great song, and it's a great way to close side one.
You're talking about, I think, a pair of absolute peaches here. I was fearful of Demon when it first started, and then 40 seconds in, it has the mother, father, brother, and sister of all fucking riffs, and suddenly I'm like really interested. And then they continue that into Contempt, and yes, Contempt is the better of the two tracks. But those are my two. These are the two highlights of the album for me. Absolutely love them.
The riffery, particularly on Contempt, it's so catchy. But there's only so much of this kind of vocal style one can take. I think great thing about Contempt is the riffs are really allowed to come through, and so it's a good closer to side one.
Powerful guitarist, the twin guitars of Settle and Helid. Anyway, we have turned it over to side two. Now, side two you can split into two parts quite simply, which is a decent start. Full of Hell, it's a stop-start belt around the head, basically. It's heavy, it's great, it's catchy. Blood Song, I love the bass lines from Lars Rosenberg, who we've not really mentioned, certainly towards the end of it. First into a kind of Anthrax bop, and secondly into some really sort of theatrical stuff from Lars Goran, which is actually a bit silly. But anyway, it's fine. It's the back three, and we'll come to the back three, which are fucking off the scale. So let's just get Full of Hell and Blood Song out of the way first.
See, this for me is a continuation of Demon and Contempt. Comparatively, I can quite happily live without the first three tracks. It's a really strong finish.
Side two is great.
It's now a sprint through, isn't it, to the end?
Yeah.
And it's I completely get this. I'm totally on board.
Because for me, the Full of Hell and Blood Song are the weakest part of the album. Reaches a peak with Wolverine Blues on side one, finishes strongly with Hollow Man and Heaven's Dying Out of Hand. Didn't catch me at all, these first two on side two.
I'm with you on Blood Song. That's my weak link of the album, but it just paves the way. It just paves the way for the extraordinary Hollow Man. Sorry, Mark, it just does.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Oh my fucking God. I mean, I just adore this. If all heavy metal was this good, that fucking riff. But it's also the songwriting and the arranging, because technically there's lots going on here. Pace is perfect. The heaviness. The finish? Are you kidding me? The album finishes like an absolute bulldozer, as I say, but the way they sew up Hollow Man in particular is just off the scale.
I think it's better structured. We haven't mentioned Nick Anderson too much. I think good drumming.
He's a better drummer than a singer.
Yes. He gets it just right. I think in terms of his playing, in terms of the fills, you don't feel he's dominating, but he's always there. Some great fills in Hollow Man. It almost gets a bit groovy, doesn't it, in that second half before that mad finish.
Oh, Hollow Man. Yeah. Oh, my God. I mean, I can't add any more kind of insight or intelligence to the conversation because I don't know half the time what I'm talking about. But oh, my God.
That's good enough. But God, we're not done with God because Heavens Die. I get as much Anthrax as I do Pantera with this line. I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's a tempo change on Heavens Die after about 43 seconds, roughly, from this kind of wonderfully doomy, gloomy riff when they add a hint of groove to it. And it's subtle. It's Pantera, but it's also Anthrax for me. But I know I sound like a stuck record, but again, that riff, it's another corker.
Yeah, I could listen to these riffs all day. By this stage, Petrov's vocals are starting to wear hard, even on me.
Thank God it's only 35 minutes, eh?
By the time we get to this part of the album, I've got the vocals. I'm kind of, I'm there. And I absolutely love the whole of side two. But I think I've worked out that this reminds me quite a bit of Five Finger Death Punch because of that melody in the actual songwriting. Like you, Rich, I could sit and listen to these riffs for forever and a day. They are just absolutely colossal.
It is produced very, very well, this album. No two ways about that. And we sign off with Out of Hand, which contains one of the simplest but best phrased choruses you will hear anyone spit out Jesus Christ, Lord of Flies in disguise. Fuck. But it's the phrasing, and it's just spot on. You know, LGP will have his critics, of course he will. There's no subtlety about this man whatsoever, but he gets it right. For me, it's the optimum vocal style for this kind of music. Anyway, another wonderful tempo change at the end of Out of Hand, more sledgehammer drumming from Anderson, and it thunders to the finish. It's a great finish.
It's an album you have to be in the mood for again, a bit like Candlemass, though, isn't it?
It's an okay finish Out of Hand to me. I mean, it's a fairly traditional pile driver of an end to an album, isn't it? But there are better songs on the album for me.
Okay, fair enough. Well, go on then. Tell me which one's your favourite?
My favourite is the title track, Wolverine Blues. In terms of a low, I think it'll go to Bloodsong.
Okay, Mark?
Well, this is really interesting, because if you'd asked me at the beginning of this conversation, I would have said Contempt was my highlight, but I'm kind of torn between Contempt and Hollow Man. I think I'll stick with Contempt, but they're very close. You can get a piece of paper between them. To me, the weakest part of the album is the first track, so okay. I'm Master.
Fair enough, yeah. Hollow Man is my high, and I'm with Richard on the low, which is Bloodsong. So there you have it. Entombed's third album, Wolverine Blues. Is it Wolverine? Who knows? Yeah, so there you go. 3 albums for this episode, which was called Creeping Death, and still is, because we haven't finished yet, because we now have to mark these albums track by track, and we'll see where they wind up in the Hall of Fame.
Reviews complete. Initializing rating process.
Okay, so we started off with Witchfinder General's Death Penalty from 1982. It did better, actually, than I thought it was going to do, if I'm being absolutely honest. We're all pretty much in the same ballpark. Steve, you gave it a 6.9. Richard gave it a 7 dead, and I gave it a 7.25 for an average album score of 7.06190. Richard, Candlemass.
Yeah, not quite as consistent as Witchfinder General, as you would have discovered, no doubt, from listening to the earlier commentary. Yeah, Steve felt it was too fast and just gave it a 6.42. Mark quite liked it. Quite a lot. Actually, gave it a 7.91, and unsurprisingly, I liked it most of all, and I gave it an 8.25. And that gave Epicus Doomicus Metallicus an overall score of 7.53. Steve, how did Entombed do?
Unsurprisingly, role reversal in terms of the scores for Wolverine Blues from 1993. You liked it least of all, gave it 6.9. Mark in the middle again, 7.7. And I liked it most of all with a score of 7.8 for an overall score, decent enough, of 7.46333. So let's go and see where these three have now wound up in our burgeoning Hall of Fame.
It's time to put the rock in a hard place. Opening the Hall of Fame.
So here we are once again in our Hall of Fame. 219 albums now in the hall. Propping up the table at 219 is Nuclear Assault. Well, we actually have to climb a reasonable amount up into the 170s for Death Penalty by Witchfinder General. They find themselves at number 171. Just below Open Up and Say, Boy, Poison. And just above, can you believe it, just above Ozzy Osbourne's Diary of a Madman. Climb up a fair bit higher, closing in on the top 100 for Wolverine Blues by Entombed. They are at number 114. And interestingly sandwiched between News of the World by Queen and Double Eclipse by Hardline. Now, there's some variety for you, listeners. And we are just into the top 100 with Candlemass's Epicus Doomicus Metallicus. They enter the Hall of Fame at number 99, and they're a place above Lightning Strikes by Loudness and a place below Down to Earth by Rainbow. So, yeah, one entry into the top 100, gents, and a couple into the 200. And I mean, Mark, let's come to you first. So, Death Penalty, actually, all things considering, did pretty well.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I suspect that's its quirky charm that's got it there, rather than necessarily what you find in the grooves of the record. But having said that, yeah, we all agreed it was good fun, and in the end, isn't that why we listen to music, is to have fun? So
I'd have had Entombed and Candlemass the other way around, obviously. But what I would say about Death Penalty is that if we'd have slotted in another line for how much we'd have enjoyed the album, we'd have added a point each for the fun it gave us. You know, it's not a great album, but we've had an absolute blast listening to it, and that's ultimately what an album should do, shouldn't it? So
yeah.
And as Richard said earlier, all three of these have been kind of growers. So, good week. Good episode.
Right. Okay. Well, I suppose what we now need to do is tell each other what we're doing next for the next episode. For those of you that are interested in such things, we spun the Tico Torres Tombola of topics and themes. And we had to remind ourselves, didn't we? Once we'd reminded ourselves that it was inventions, Richard, being the professor on the podcast, introduced some rules. Do you want to outline the rules, Richard?
Well, when I was looking, I felt that it had to be invented. It couldn't just be something that appeared as some kind of tool over the course of history, like an axe or a sword or whatever. That it actually had to be, I thought, listed on Wikipedia as an invention with an inventor and a date. But hell knows if we've got anywhere close to that. That's what I did.
Let's just say no. Let's just say no. We haven't.
I was going to say, once Richard has sucked all the fun out of the process, what did we come up with? All right. Yeah. So where did your
well, my rules led me, and there'll be shouts of, hang on a minute, you're just playing what you want. But it led me to an invention that originally appeared around 1889.
Hemispheres were not an invention,
and it was initially known as the Braun tube or Brown tube, which is a cathode ray tube with beam-forming plates and a magnetic field that then became known as the oscilloscope. And an oscilloscope appears on the front cover
how fucking tenuous is
of
this?
an album by Survivor called Vital Signs, and that is my choice.
Steve.
No, I didn't give it that much thought. I thought of an album. And figured out, and then locked onto Wikipedia to see if I could justify it. So, in fairness, there are a number of claims to the date of the invention of the tool I've gone for. It appears as early as 1475 in Francesco di Giorgio Martini's treatise Trattoria di Architectura, and it has been claimed by some to date back 5,000 years in the creation of Crannogs at Ockbank and Loch Tay in Scotland 5,000 years ago. I am talking about, of course, the one and only pile driver. That's my invention. No. Which enables us to play the one and only Stay Ugly.
Who's there? Who's the door? Right, okay. So, somewhere between 1452 and 1519, somewhere between there, a bloke who could draw a little bit came up with a drawing of what would later become, and the gentleman I'm talking about is Leonardo da Vinci, obviously. He drew this concept that he had kind of dreamed up in his head, and it was what we would now describe as a chain, the link to a chain. So we are going to welcome to the podcast for the first time.
Yay!
Dawkins breaking the chain. So there we go. That's it. Dokken fucking pile driver. Survivor. Oh, God.
Again, a measure of the most eclectic rock and metal podcast you will find everywhere, particularly coming after this episode.
Cool. Okay, well, we've all got some listening to do, that's for sure. So, hope you enjoyed that. We've had a blast. Obviously, if you just take the backstory to Witchfinder General, we've had a blast. We didn't need to do anything else. We had the biggest laugh ever. Anyway, we will be back at some point once we have got our heads around Survivor, Pile Driver, and Dokken. And glad of having your company. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
All music clips featured in the Enter Sadmen podcast appear within the context of criticism and or commentary, and as such are used under the fair use provisions of the exceptions to copyright rules of UK and international copyright law. To make sure the rock rolls forever on, Mark, Steve, and Rich urge all their listeners to show their love and support for the artists and writers featured on the show by purchasing the original music or subscribing to a licensed and regulated streaming service.